My name is Brian Wish. I'm an entrepreneur, CEO, and pathfinder. If I've learned anything in life, it's that self-discovery is a critical part of living intentionally, building meaningful relationships, and achieving the future we see for ourselves. In July of 2021, I sold all my possessions, headed west, and began a quest to live a fuller and more meaningful life. The experience helped me truly understand the power of a single moment. And through my conversations with leaders from all walks of life, I've seen how that one phone call, heartbreak, diagnosis, or lost job can transform the entire course of our lives. In this podcast, I sit down with entrepreneurs, influencers, and experts across industries to talk through the events that changed everything. Together, we'll relive the make or break decisions, hard conversations, periods of despair and hope, chance encounters, and everything that followed. Seshadri is the founder of Agile Growth Partner, which provides business coaching for smart and hungry CEOs looking to achieve their growth aspirations without burning out. Since 2014, Shri has coached more than 100 leaders through one-on-one sessions and trained over 1,000 leaders across programs. Prior to starting Agile Growth Partners, Shri worked in senior commercial, financial, and strategy roles in Fortune 100 companies including GE and Capital One, leading teams of up to 50 staff, managing a budget of over $600 million and advising CXOs on a range of management topics. Shri's clients achieve superior business results through increasing productivity, revenue, and profitability, and report significantly higher confidence, lower stress, reduced time consumed by the business, and vastly improved work-life balance. Shri holds a bachelor's and master's degrees in engineering and MBA and has completed Georgetown University's leadership coaching program and Harvard Kennedy School's art and practice of leadership development. When Shri was declined an opportunity he felt he was suited for, it gave him the opportunity to better understand himself, recognize his specialty, and ultimately how to apply his expertise in a more holistic way. Find out how Shri made this change on The One Away Show. Shri, welcome to The One Away Show.
Hey, Brian, great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you here. You are in my neck of the woods from where my family's from, so it's nice to reconnect with my roots. Glad we're here. Shri, I enjoyed our first chat. I'm looking forward to this. What is your one away moment that you want to share with us today?
So I was thinking about our conversation, and one of the moments really came to my mind was, this is going back to late 2019. Just to give you a little bit of context, I used to work in the corporate world. I'd worked for companies like General Electric and Capital One and Corporate Executive Board. And then in 2014, I made a switch into coaching. So I did my leadership coaching program at Georgetown. I did another program at the Kennedy School at Harvard and a bunch of other certifications. So I kind of built this portfolio of coaching, training, facilitation, leadership development, and so forth. And in 2019, I was living in Toronto at that point. And I used to do work with a very, very good consulting organization. And they had put me up for an opportunity, a long-term team coaching opportunity at a major company in the life sciences space. So as part of that, the way it works is, the people who are managing those projects want to have a meeting with you to make sure, it's a good fit and so forth. And I had the meeting, which I thought went extremely well. This was a really exciting opportunity to coach a bunch of different teams within that organization. It was a longer term engagement, and it's pretty significant from a financial perspective, but also presented an opportunity to kind of apply my skills in a very meaningful way and at scale. And so I have the meeting, the interview, it goes really well, and I'm looking forward to hearing back from them. And the next week I found out that I didn't get the gig. It was very disappointing at that time, in that moment. And I thought, I feel like I have the skills that are necessary, to deliver immense amount of value in this engagement. And past clients who have had me in such situations have really found it valuable. And I thought it was a good fit. What happened here? And so I reached out to, there were two people who interviewed me. I reached out to them, and actually one of them, and I said, hey, I'd love to just get some feedback, understand what happened. I thought I was very well positioned, but you guys have gone a different way. And this woman was just so kind, Brian. She wrote back to me and she said, "Listen, very happy to provide you feedback. And we found a time for us to connect within a couple of weeks." And in that meeting, shared a very interesting insight for me. She said, "Shri, we really like meeting you. Your energy was great. You're very, very knowledgeable. You have a great track record. You have everything that is required for the role. But there was just the one thing that kind of stood out for us." I said, "What is that?" She said, "We were looking for a team performance coach, right? Because this job was about coaching a series of team who are in the mid-level, but a lot of your examples were around business performance. And to us, you seem more like a business performance coach who works with more senior stakeholders." In the moment, I'm thinking, but like I could easily do what you're looking to do, but she was trying to tell me that you actually have a gift that you should go apply in a different kind of setting. And that moment really kind of helped me see something that was right in front of me, but I was not able to see. Mm. Within a couple of months, I processed that information. And once I kind of got over the grief of like not getting that gig, I was like, what do we have here? And I realized, yes, I am a business performance coach. I have worked in large businesses in a variety of different functions. And I have a unique kind of skill set wherein I understand sales and marketing and business development and finance and strategy because I've been in those roles. And I get coaching both at the leadership coaching level and the team coaching level. And how do I apply this in a more holistic way? And so that then led me to actually making a very hard pivot within a couple of months, where I went from doing a variety of things, a lot of different types of clients, a lot of different types of engagements, to only doing one thing, which was coaching for CEO and senior teams of mid-market companies. And the last 4 years have been just phenomenal. And I'm so grateful for those people making that choice, and then for being kind enough to take the time to give me the feedback and help me see something that I really needed to see.
Oh, you said it best at the end. It's she gave you a gift. Well, she gave you a no, or the team gave you a no of, hey, it's not for us. The fact that you followed up and asked, she gave you the gift of one insight that you could maybe look at yourself in the mirror and be like, aha, and connect that to your past experiences. So good for you for one, asking, and then two, seeking clarity and why the outcome was the way it was. And I'm sure that lesson repeats itself with all your clients today. You seem like you gathered a lot of different experiences kind of earlier in your career, realized, hey, there was a different path for me. What was it about, hey, I want to do business coaching or team coaching? Like, what precipitated that in your journey?
Sometimes, I do reflect on that question about my journey of becoming a coach. In many ways, it feels like I'm an accidental coach. And what I mean by that is, from a very young age, I was keen on wanting to become a CEO. My uncle was a managing director, basically CEO of a pretty significant company in South India. So I grew up in India. So I finished my undergrad there, and I then came to the US in 96 to get my master's, worked for a little while, and then we've kind of bounced around the world. But I still have this very distinct memory of being a teenager, right? 14, 15 years old, and going to the airport with my uncle to see him off. He was going away on a trip to Europe from India. And he was one of very few people in my extended family who had ever traveled overseas. So my uncle was somebody who was he's very smart, but also very hardworking, very high ethical standards, very high integrity. And as a result of which, he had basically worked his way up to becoming a managing director of a significant corporation, basically working for a billionaire in South India. And I looked at him, he was kind of the role model for me in many ways about like who I wanted to become. So I thought, someday I want to work hard. I want to grow businesses and be a leader and become a CEO. And I want to be this high flying, jet setting corporate executive. That was kind of like the image that I had for me as a young teenager. In some ways, I kind of followed that path. I came to the US. I finished my undergrad in India, came to the US for my master's in engineering, worked for a little while, and then I got my MBA. at University of Maryland. And then I joined a leadership program at GE. And, back then, right? So you're talking 20 years ago, 2005 is when I was graduating from MBA. There was a couple of what you might call CEO factors in corporate America. You had GE. Many people from GE had gone on to become CEOs of, other companies. You had McKinsey, and then you had Goldman Sachs, right? So a lot of people from these organizations, for whatever reason, they got like amazing leadership training. They built like incredible business skills, and then they were able to go out and deploy that in the world. And so that was kind of my thought process. That's what I'm going to do. But along the way, there was a curveball, and that was my wife's career. So my wife, and she had worked in international development. She was a Peace Corps volunteer in Thailand, and we met in graduate school. She was studying international development and so forth. She was working for USAID, and she had done a lot of international work. And she basically got a job with the Department of State, right? So U.S. Department of State as an American diplomat. And what that meant was her job would require her to move to different embassies and consulates around the world every 2 to 3 years, right? So you go in, you do an assignment, then you move on to something else. So we started off by, Anne joining the State Department in 2004. I graduated in 2005, and I joined a leadership program at GE, which was a phenomenal experience, right? I went to Cincinnati, worked in GE aircraft engines. Then I went to Northern Nevada, worked in LG Energy. I then went to India with GE. So Anne got posted to India, and I was able to convince GE to send me there as an expat. And so there were some interesting things going on, amazing experience along the way. And then at some point, I moved from GE to corporate executive board in India, and I was heading their finance and strategy practice. And then we came back to the DC area, which is where CEB was headquartered. I was there in corporate strategy for a little while, launched some programs and so forth. And then I went to Capital One in a finance role. And then in 2014, we were getting ready to move overseas again. So Anne got posted to the US Embassy in Bangkok, and we had to move. And that is when I started asking myself, what do I love doing, right? What gives me energy? What brings me joy? And as I reflected on my past, I realized that helping people achieve their potential was something very meaningful to me. Mm. So when I was in India, I was leading a team of 50 researchers. And for a while, I was still building my middle management layer. And so I had 30 direct reports. So think about it, right? Like for 30 direct reports, you are doing mid-year reviews, annual reviews, and so forth. And I would tell that to people, and then they would be like, oh my God, that must be so awful. Like that many, I would never want to do that. But I had a completely different reaction inside me. I was like, I was so happy that I get to work with all these young, bright, like really motivated, inspired guys and girls who wanted to really do great work. And I look forward to those conversations. So that's when I realized something was a little bit different about me than most people, right? Something that was kind of tiring for others was kind of interesting for me. And then when I kept thinking about like, how do I help people achieve their potential, I kind of reflected. I'd worked with a couple of coaches. I'd worked with, a therapist at some point, and I'd been exposed to this whole world of psychology and emotional intelligence and so forth. And I was really drawn to it. So when we moved to Bangkok in 2014, I said, let me give it a shot. So I applied to the program at Georgetown, got in, and from there, over the last 10 years, kind of built this practice. And now I find myself in a very, very fortunate place where I get to coach CEOs and senior teams. And there's many days I can't believe I get paid to do this work. I mean, it's just awesome.
Wow, it was quite a journey, and seems like a lot of following your instincts, a lot of moments like you talked about when you were with your wife, and just kind of seeing what you were doing in India and managing, and just kind of sounds like you've kind of put all those pieces in a stew, and you realize the outcome was, or the end product was, hey, I could really take all this, put it together, and then go help, as you've talked about, these growth-minded CEOs. But like, sounds like it takes a lot of reflection, right? And a lot of internalization and a lot of understanding of self to arrive at that place.
And that is a continuous process, right? It is something that you have to kind of commit for life, essentially, because there's so much there. Sure. And there's always new things to discover. But it is also a practice of being more intentional and really learning to listen to yourself,
Yeah.
right? Learning to listen to what your heart is yearning for, learning to be able to see your fears and kind of face them, and learning to be adventurous as you imagine the future, right? For many of us,
Say
we have a
more. Say more
constricted.
about that.
One of the shifts that happened for me early on this journey was, for a while, I was like, what can I do? Right. So that would be the question I'd ask. So yeah, I could do sales, I could do marketing, I could do strategy, I could do finance. And I would kind of go in these different directions. Some of it is like wanting to be a generalist and understand business from that perspective. But at some point, I changed the question from what can I do to what do I want to do? And that can give you very different types of answers. Well, one of the models that like appeals to me a lot is this model of ikigai, which is this Japanese concept where they say, if you think about four circles and, there's some overlap between them. So the four circles represent four questions. First question is, what do you love doing? Right? What do you love doing? The second question is, what are you good at? These are two separate questions. There could be something that I love very much, but I could be terrible at it. Right? Or there could be something that I'm very good at it, but I don't enjoy doing it. So you answer those two questions, right? What do I love doing? What am I good at? The third question is, what does the world need? And the fourth question is, what is something that pays well? And when you can find something that you love doing, that you're good at, the world needs, and it pays well to meet whatever your financial needs are, you've kind of hit the jackpot. And for me, I feel like the work that I do right now meets all of those criteria. I love coaching. I can tell that myself. Like when I'm coaching, I'm kind of in the zone. Like it's just, I feel like I'm in flow. I absolutely love it. Having heard a lot of feedback from clients, I've come to recognize that I'm quite good at it. Obviously, it could get way better, and I'm always working on it. But I'm quite good at it. The third one is there is clearly a need for coaching, right? There's a lot of CEOs who have great aspirations. They want to have an impact in this world, but it is quite a roller coaster, and they could use a coach along that journey versus using a DIY mindset all the time. Right. And because of the type of work that I do and I'm creating a lot of value, I can charge a decent amount of money, which is something that's important to me. So because I'm able to kind of solve for all of that, it's been really interesting.
Yeah.
And going back to the earlier question that you're asking me about that future, right? So just about 10 days ago, I was attending a workshop in Salt Lake City with the Leadership Circle. And the topic of the 2-day workshop was narrative identity, right? So if you think about your identity in terms of like who you are, what do you do, what can you do, what can you not do, how does the world work, and where do you fit in, all that stuff, there are some underlying narratives that create that identity for each of us, right? And one of the ways to think about it, which I've learned, is it has 3 different components in it. There is a curated past, right? So there's a lot of things that have happened in our past, but as we think about it, there's a certain story wherein we pick out certain elements of it, and that kind of forms a curated past. There is the experience present. How are you feeling in the moment? What's your lived experience? And then there's an imagined future. These things collectively shape our identity. And many times when I find clients are feeling stuck, it has connections to this identity. It could be a constricted imagination, or the curated past that they're holding on to may be incomplete and may not be serving them. And being able to kind of recognize that you have a lot more agency in these areas, right? You have a lot more freedom in terms of how you define your identity, can open up a lot of pathways for you. So again, Brian, when I think about my work, right, my work with CEOs, I feel like I'm always paying attention to 2 agendas. The first agenda is the agenda driven by the CEO, which is all about how do we have greater impact through our organization? How do we grow revenues? How do we grow profits? How do we increase enterprise value? What's our strategy? All of that stuff, right? So that's the agenda driven by the CEO. The second agenda I pay attention to is the agenda driving the CEO. Why do they do what they do? what is driving some of their behaviors, whether it's fully conscious or not. And being able to work on both those things can be really powerful, right? So you have I use this, my model is called the 5 drivers of agile growth. So we focus on strategy, execution, culture, cash flow, and talent. But also it's about expanding the leadership capacity and capability of the leader, of the CEO, because that in many ways can be the limiting factor for the growth, long-term growth of the organization. And being able to do both of those things can create some interesting opportunities.
There's a lot you're giving me to chew on. I'm trying to figure out where we dive in here. But I think what I'm picking up from you is what a intentional kind of deliberation of like how you think about this experience. And I love what you said about the CEO, like the agenda of the CEO for like why they're doing it, but like also the agenda for the organization of like where it needs to go and the CEO's role in that. And also just back to your own experience around doing what you love, making money doing it, and what the world needs, right? And it's neat that you said your dream growing up was to always be this big CEO from what you saw. But what's also neat is your ability to now influence through all your clients thousands of people's lives, right? Just by working with an executive team or the CEO who's impacting those people under them. So, I mean, it seems like you've really brought so much of your life together, to your point, in a way that like makes sense for you and doing what you're most uniquely equipped to do, which is remarkable to be able to say that you've found that, I'd say.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, and I truly feel very, very blessed to be find myself in this situation.
Yeah.
But let me just be very clear: it hasn't all been
Easy. I totally.
easy, right? It has
Yeah.
been quite the roller coaster.
So one of the things I was going to ask you is you said you've been doing this for four years now, full time,
So I've been coaching for 10 years,
right? But like in
but
this,
CEO coaching for 4 years. Yeah.
yeah. And I was going to say like we evolve as humans, right? Like we peel the layers, we show up differently, and it's iterative, right? So when you first started just CEO coaching 4 years ago to the Shri of today, what do you think is the most difference in how you show up for your clients now versus back then?
So when I think about what is most different today than like 3 or 4 years ago, there is greater self-confidence
Hmm.
in which then leads to greater self-efficacy, right? Like belief that you can actually do what is necessary. And I find that there's a very significant relationship between the level of confidence and your physiological and your mental state and emotional state. So think about what happens when somebody is faced with a challenge and their confidence level is really low. They're going to feel scared. They're going to feel very anxious. And, they might be, if it really kind of acts up, you might even experience some level of depression or feeling stuck and so forth. If that person is now somehow able to tap into some confidence and feel comfortable and believe that they can somehow prevail in the face of the challenge, their emotional state completely shifts, right? I was just thinking about like what might be a book I might refer to in our conversation, and I was thinking about this one right here. It's Fearless Golf by Dr. Gio Valiente. And the name of the book is Fearless Golf. It's about conquering the mental game. I'm not a golfer, right? I've tried a little bit, top golf, and that probably driving range is about how far I've gone, but I kind of understand it, right? I heard Dr. Gio Valiente on a podcast, the Knowledge Podcast with Shane Parrish. And if you ever get a chance, it's a two-part podcast. It's excellent.
Hmm.
And so he, coaches some of the top golfers in the world, but he's also worked with like NBA players, NFL teams, and so forth. He was also Steve Cohen's coach, was a very successful hedge fund manager and so forth. And he talks about what is the impact of fear when it's unregulated on your performance. It can be debilitating. And I've been thinking about fear for a little while. And I feel like it is a underpinning, overarching emotion, which when not handled effectively can really cause a lot of havoc. I still remember this is about a dozen years ago. So I was seeing a therapist. This guy, Sam Goodman, was now a good friend, and at some point he said, like, Shri, what is it that you want? Like, what's going on? I said, I want to be more bold. He said, okay, what does that mean? I said, I want to have greater courage. He said, I get that. What does that mean? I said, I want to be fearless.
Mm.
And he said, huh, that's interesting. He said, just imagine you're fearless. And he's in Washington, D.C. He's, on Connecticut Avenue. He says, if you try to cross the street on Connecticut Avenue without fear, you wouldn't be able to cross the street because you'd get hit by a bus or a car. And his point was, fear isn't the problem.
Mm.
It has a functional purpose. It's serving your purpose. Right? But if you give it too much control,
Mm-hmm.
then it can be really challenging.
Totally.
So I feel like one of the keys for leaders to raise their awareness of consciousness and become more effective leaders is really learning to become fully present to their authentic fear and recognize what are the fears that have a pretty significant impact for them. Not from the perspective that once you recognize fear, you give in to fear. That is not at all. But there's this very famous neuroscientist and Dan Siegel who says, name it to tame it.
Hmm.
So the idea is that if you're able to make that fear an object and take perspective on it, you'll be able to handle it much more effectively. You think about the work of Carol Dweck from Stanford, right? The book Mindset, and she did a phenomenal job in kind of describing the distinction between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. One of the most important differences in the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset is orientation towards failure, right? In the fixed mindset, failure is seen as proving that you're incompetent and it's something that needs to be avoided at all costs. Whereas in the growth mindset, failure is just seen as another opportunity to learn, right? So the fear associated with failure is very different in these cases. And in order for us to embrace the growth mindset, we have to become comfortable with fear and failure and feedback. So I do a keynote around growth mindset, and I say, we're going to talk about 3 F words, right? People are like, oh my God, is he going to start swearing? I'm like, no, I promise you I'm not swearing, but we're going to talk about fear, failure, and feedback. And being able to understand those well and, learning to surface fear, take perspective on it, learning to relate differently to failure, and recognizing that, for you to advance, you have to fail. There's that famous Jordan commercial. I usually play that video. I've missed so many shots and I've failed so many times, and that's why I win. And then I talk about feedback. How do you put yourself in a position where you can receive feedback that helps you get better, right? So if you think about where we started the story, I was telling you about the time when I didn't get that opportunity, and I went out and sought some feedback, and she was able to say, hey, this was for a team performance coach role. You seem to be more of a business performance coach. And when I was able to allow that feedback to come through, it opened up a whole new avenue for me. But I find many people can be resistant to feedback, which is problematic.
I love how deep of a thinker you are around what people might, I'm not saying these are basic words, but like you're taking words that like we face every day and you're like unpacking it, right, in a way that's simplified, connective to just the human condition, right? Because you're right, like fear is something we all face. And it's a fear any leader faces, right? Just by the nature of being in the role that they're in. But to your point, like how we handle it, how we show up in the face of it, and it's there for a reason. And you clearly haven't run across Connecticut Avenue, in a way that has hurt you. So, it's probably good that you also have a fear response. You're not like the Alex guy who scales those mountains in Yosemite with his hands. So,
Oh my goodness.
that's Yosemite behind you, isn't it?
Yes, it is. That was with my son. Yeah.
as you talk
Uh,
about fear, I'm thinking about that movie. So, it's
I know, but think about it, right? Like I'm sure he has a very deep respect for of the fear, but he has learned how to master it,
right. It's true. That's another perspective.
right?
Maybe you need to interview him. Um, so that's right. You never know. So, Shri,
Yeah.
I totally appreciate the context of kind of how you show up and kind of, it sounds like you're asking the people you work with really thoughtful questions. And with these, and it seems like you've learned a lot, right? Like, to bring this back around, like you're more confident in yourself because you've run up against these individuals over and over again to the point where you've seen a lot of the plays unfold, and you're more equipped now to handle them. And that's where confidence comes from. You just have the repetitions of seeing it over and
Yeah.
over again. So pretty cool.
I do a keynote on decoding elite performance.
Hmm.
And what I say in that is when you look at elite performers in pretty much any domain, you see that there's these four P's that are at play. The first P is actually two, which is purpose and passion. And purpose could be, we could use the Ikigai model. And for passion, if you think about the core of that word, it actually comes from passio, which means to suffer. And passion is, what are you willing to suffer for?
Hmm.
If you think about the word compassion, it's to suffer with somebody else, right? So being able to say, I'm willing to kind of endure and willing to suffer for something and I give it what it takes, that's what passion is. The second P is persistence. How will you deal when you're faced with adversity? How will you respond? That's where grit and resilience, all of those things come into play. The third P is practice, right? Deliberate practice, which is very much about slowing down the action significantly so that you can see exactly what you're doing and learn from each of those things, right? That's the reason any athlete, like you think about like football, NBA, they sit there and they spend hours and hours watching reel, right? Like they watch video highlights to see exactly how they responded, what the other teams didn't, like they break down those things. And the fourth P is basically pattern recognition, right? And in any domain, that's what the elite performers are really good at doing. They recognize the patterns that other people miss. So anyway, sorry.
No, no, no. I mean, it's fascinating. I think a lot about top performers myself. And I think also when you are someone who say operates or tries to operate at a high level, I mean, you're constantly thinking about what you can just critique in your environment and surroundings and things to just elevate how you show up every day. And to your point about fear earlier, when you have that kind of overriding you, it can all significantly impact performance around, as you said. And I love what you said about passion, what you're willing to endure or suffer for. Like, yeah, that's big stuff. Now, Shreem, one of my questions for you as you've been talking is, it seems like you have taken on a lot of your own, let's just say, sacrifice to kind of go into this path. It's a bit unknown. I mean, more or less, you're your own entrepreneur. What do you think you've had to endure or give up or sacrifice to become this version of yourself, to go equip other people to go become the best versions of themselves? What has been your own journey into, you know,
That's a very good question. So I'll tell you, some of it is the big one was actually letting go of a dream, actually. Right. So I had this vision of myself that I was going to be some kind of Fortune 500 CEO or something like that. And at some point, I realized that with the setup that we had, with us moving around every few years, that may not be the pathway because, I have some of my friends and peers who are in those ranks, either C-suite or at that level, some former bosses and so forth. And what that requires is total commitment to the organization and willingness to do whatever it takes to, like to move wherever the job takes you and so on and so forth. But in my case, I didn't have that flexibility. And so there was some grief associated with that, right? I was also some resentment that kind of can build up in the relationship and so forth. But once I was able to, but I've been able to kind of do some work on it and then say, hey, let me accept where I am right now and say, what else wants to come through here? So kind of make space for a new dream. And that is how this dream of like wanting to be a coach or wanting to be of somebody of service really kind of came to play.
Yeah.
And now that I look back in hindsight, I am very grateful to my wife for choosing this career, which allowed me to kind of come into this space and do work that is really meaningful for me, although it's very kind of painful at times, right? And again, I would not be able to do what I've done if not for my wife's career, because one of the nice things about her career is, when we get posted overseas, all of you American taxpayers are paying for our housing, the kids go to a good school, you're living in a country where a dollar salary like goes a really long way. So you have financial freedom and independence to do other things. Yeah. Right. So that allowed me to go out and take all these courses and make all these investments and for a little while not have such great income. But then it came back many times over. Yeah, so that's the interesting part. And so there's a lot of things that you've had to endure, and also what I've learned along the way is that I used to, for a while, be very caught up in comparing myself to others. So what happens is when you go to a large organization, they have this whole hierarchy and you're trying to move up and all that stuff, get promotions. And so you're constantly looking at people above you and a little bit of envy and saying, what do I need to do to get there and advance and all that stuff. But you're also comparing yourself to peers and so forth. But what I've learned is the act of comparing yourself to others, sometimes it can motivate you. But if you do too much of that, it can be really detrimental to you and your well-being.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I've found that, if you're looking for an absolute guaranteed sure shot way, a fail-proof way of making yourself miserable, start comparing yourself to others. It's about this locus of control, right? Like looking for extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation. That's the shift that happens.
Yeah, I think that's a really vulnerable share, right? But also, like you said, right? You let go of this big dream, but letting go created space for something that potentially was so much more, and probably admittedly, I'm not saying it's not stressful, but probably a whole lot stressful than managing a big company. So, you might have a whole better relationship with, the home front than you ever thought.
Absolutely.
You work with clients. I know you probably can't share who they are, and I'm not asking you to do that, but when you kind of look at the last 4 years, right, as you really narrowed the focus in, what are you the most proud about in a client situation? I would love to understand a situation that happened in a company. They remove client's name. You help them navigate, get to the other side. And without you, they may have not made it through. What comes to mind?
So here's one thing I'll be upfront about, Brian, and I've told this to my clients, right? Many of my clients are very successful entrepreneurs. And I've been with them on, multi-year journey and so forth, and they've done well. So one of my clients I was talking to yesterday, he said, Shri, when we started working with you in April of 22, we were at 212 million. This year we'll be at 400 million, right? So they've had phenomenal growth. But that is not because of me. I probably played a small role. And I told them, listen, you guys were successful before you met me. You'll be successful after I'm out of the system. You guys are really amazing what you've created here. And thank you for giving me the option to kind of come in and help along the way. But the things that I'm really proud of is when the leaders become less reactive and they're able to empower their people and really help them grow and develop. And through them accomplish greater things. I'll give you an example. So when I work with my clients, right, we do annual planning sessions, quarterly planning sessions, which we 2-day annual planning, at least 1 or 2 day quarterly planning. We might even do a half day monthly business review and so forth. It's very in depth in the business, looking at everything. But I also do one-on-one coaching for the CEO. And when I begin the engagement, I usually do 360s. So I use an instrument called the Leadership Circle Profile. It's a phenomenal 360. But I also do narrative interviews. So I interview 8 to 10 people and I collect all that information. I might have them do a couple of other assessments. And through that, they create a leadership development plan, which is basically what is the one big thing that they want to focus on? What is the one leadership growth area if they're able to make progress on, would make them more effective. And for many of these entrepreneurs, they can have certain styles which are reactive, as in they could be very autocratic or they could be very critical. Sometimes they're distant, or they're in like overdrive all the time. And as a result, they're not necessarily creating an environment that is conducive for people underneath them. So when I think about my purpose, Brian, it's basically I'm here to grow and develop conscious leaders, cohesive teams, and enduring businesses, right? That's why I do what I do. And when I talk about conscious leaders, it's basically for leaders to become more aware of like how are they behaving. And sometimes they might be very heavily focused on the task and getting results, but not so much on the relationship side. So you get results, but there's a very high collateral damage or body count or whatever you want to call it. And so if they're able to kind of find the right balance in that, and as a result, attract some really good people and empower them to do greater things, they will have more time for themselves and they'll achieve better results. And that shift is a hard one for many CEOs because they feel like, we are successful because I've been pushing, and I've been very controlling. If I let go, things will kind of fall apart. So it's how do you, build the right kind of infrastructure in terms of bringing the right people in. So one of the questions I'm always asking my clients is, would you enthusiastically rehire every member of your leadership team? Because many, CEOs will tolerate poor performers for a variety of reasons. It could either be that, hey, this person has been with me for 5 years or 10 years, I can't let them go, or like, whatever. Or they kind of put up with poor performance because if they feel like, somebody is better than nobody. And, many times they end up like upgrading the talent, which is crucial if you want to grow.
Yeah.
And they find that it gives them much more greater capability to achieve great things. So when there's a shift in the conversation of the CEOs talking about the importance of leadership, talking about the importance of core purpose, core values, culture, and taking care of their people, that brings me a lot of joy.
I'm sure it's neat to really infuse that into a whole company culture, maybe in a way that it never was articulated, shared, expressed, right? Where everyone in the organization starts beating to that same drum.
Yeah. I mean, one of my clients, he shot a testimonial for me a couple of months ago, and he said, this was the opening line. He said, before Shri, we were scattered and disorganized, cluttered and disorganized. After Shri, we have clarity, we have alignment, we have accountability, and we've had great growth. I was like, that's beautiful. So that's good. Work well done. That was a moment of like pride.
I know you're working with more successful companies if they're at a mid-market level. However, sometimes you could show up and understanding the situation better than anyone, but the leadership doesn't maybe do the work or fully like put in how do you manage, right? Like yourself, right? As like your own like operational leader for the people you work with. Like, how do you navigate like you're pouring in and giving your all to something, and then
so that's a good question. One of the things that I've learned is from Marshall Goldsmith. And he says the secret to coaching lies in client selection. And he gives the example of Alan Mulally, who used to be the CEO at Boeing a long time ago. And then he came to Ford and he completely turned around Ford. When Alan Mulally came to Ford, Ford was losing $17 billion a year. And Alan Mulally came in and he fixed that. He turned around. And when the global financial crisis happened in 2008, they were the only car company that did not go into bankruptcy. Right. And he says, I spent very little time with Alan Mulally, but he had the best results. And so one of the things that I do is like, especially now, I've kind of learned over, I didn't realize this early in my career, coaching career, but like now I've realized that being able to kind of select clients who are coachable is very important. And what does that mean? It's basically people who have courage, humility, and discipline. right? And there is a deep desire and willingness to change.
Hmm.
If those things are not present, it's very hard to really get value from the coaching engagement.
Hmm.
It's just like, I have a personal trainer, right? I had a session with him this morning, and I was talking to him, and I said, Brent, imagine, right now I'm doing a bunch of changes, watching what I eat. Like he wants me to get 150 grams of protein and like drink a lot of water and really kind of reduce the alcohol and so forth. And I've been able to do a lot of those things, and I'm seeing some results. And I said, like, how do you feel when you have people who don't do those things? He said, that's really hard. Because at the end of the day, you're the one who is doing all the work. You're doing the pull-ups, you're doing the, bench press, you're lifting the weights. I'm not doing it. I'm here to support you. But if you're not willing to do the work in the gym and outside the gym, you're not going to get results. And that's very frustrating. So screening for people who actually want to do the work is a very important step.
Yeah.
And so in my own evolution, right, I remember a very good friend of mine who was a very successful CEO in Australia asking me, so Mike, tell me, what kind of clients do you like to work with? This is how dumb I was back in the day. I'm still dumb in some ways, but I said, anybody who'd be willing to pay me. And I look back and I was like, that was such a stupid answer. Now it's like, I can work with companies who are small, 5-10 million or a couple $100 million in revenue. But the main thing is it has to be somebody who really is committed to growth of themselves and the company and is willing to do the work and is coachable, right? If you have that, amazing things can happen.
It's well said. I would say it's even more it's well said, and especially a client services driven type of business, which I would say more or less you're in, and which we're in. And the early lessons really mold you for sure around what you should and shouldn't be doing. All right, last question, and then we'll send you on your way. 10, 15, 20 years from now, where is Shri in the world? What have you done? What are you most proud of, excited about moving forward?
So let's say 15, 20 years from now, I have been able to serve hundreds of CEOs in companies and had a positive contribution in helping them achieve those things, right? Becoming more conscious leaders, building cohesive teams, and enduring businesses, right? And as a result, the employees who work there are able to do their best work and have a positive impact in the world, right? Somehow I've been useful. And hopefully along the way, I've been able to write a book or two. I'm working on one right now. I'm doing more speaking events, and I'm also working in a very intimate fashion with a few companies that are doing good in the world.
That's great.
And on the personal front, by then, hopefully, we'll have grandkids. My kids are all teenagers now, 18, 15, 14, but 15, 20 years from now, we'll be spending a lot of time with our families. That's the goal.
That's great. Well, I was going to say, Shri, your trainer is doing something right because you're glowing on the screen today. So you can tell your trainer that, people are you can tell your trainer that people are taking note of your screen glow and the aura that you're emanating. So, I'm sure your clients like that too. So, thanks for the positivity. Thanks for the energy. Thanks for the lessons, the learnings. Excited to follow your journey and looking forward to staying in touch.
Brian, thank you so very much. It's been such a pleasure meeting you. I've been, watching your videos and your work, and having this conversation today was just a true gift. So I'm very, very grateful to you. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for taking the time to look. Where can people find you? Reach out.
So my website is agilegrowthpartners.com. And I have a YouTube channel. It is Agile Growth with Shri. And I'm sure you can find me on LinkedIn. You can probably put in the show notes my LinkedIn profile.
We'll do all the things. Awesome. Great to see you. Thank you for joining me on the One Away Show. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, please leave a review and follow us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Have a one away moment you'd like to share? Follow me on Twitter or Instagram at BrianWish_, or reach out to me on LinkedIn and tell me about the moment that altered your life. The One Away Show is produced by Arcbound, a company dedicated to helping entrepreneurs, experts, and visionaries launch authentic personal brands. From message development to podcast production, social media content generation, and book writing, we work with you to create your arc. Head to arcbound.com to learn more. Thank you for listening, and please join me next time on The One Away Show.